Jasmine Carter was not your average businesswoman. From the moment she could count change at her family's kitchen table in Atlanta, everyone knew she had something special. Her mum taught 5th grade at the local elementary school, working long hours grading papers late into the night. Her dad ran a small corner store where Jasmine spent most afternoons after school, watching how he treated every customer like family. "Remember, Jazzy," he would tell her as she helped stock shelves, "people might forget what you say or do, but they never forget how you make them feel." Those words stuck with her through the years. In high school, while other kids were hanging out at the mall, Jasmine was organizing fundraisers and running the student store. She turned the usually forgotten little shop into the most popular spot on campus by adding homemade cookies and creating a warm, welcoming space. When college acceptance letters came, Jasmine had her pick of schools but chose Howard University without hesitation. Those 4 years shaped her in ways she never expected. She studied business by day and worked hotel reception desks by night, fascinated by the inner workings of the hospitality world. "You know what's wrong with hotels these days?" she once told her roommate during a late-night study session. "Nobody makes you feel truly welcome anymore. It's all about efficiency, not experience." After graduating with honors, Jasmine jumped straight into the hotel industry. She started at the bottom, working every position she could: housekeeper, concierge, kitchen staff, event planner. Other management trainees complained about the long hours and hard work, but Jasmine soaked up every lesson like a sponge. By 30, she had climbed to regional manager for a major hotel chain, overseeing properties across 3 states. Her hotels consistently ranked highest in customer satisfaction, but something still felt missing. "I can't keep implementing someone else's vision," she told her parents over Sunday dinner. "The changes I want to make, they're too big for my current role." Her father looked concerned. "The hotel business is tough, baby. Big companies have deep pockets." "And I have big dreams," Jasmine replied with a smile that hid her nerves. For the next 5 years, Jasmine worked harder than ever. During the day, she managed hotels. At night, she built her business plan, saved every penny, and networked with potential investors. She lived in a tiny apartment, drove an old car, and passed up vacations. Every sacrifice was a step toward her dream. The moment finally came when she was 35. Standing outside a rundown hotel in downtown Chicago, keys in hand, Jasmine felt equal parts terrified and thrilled. The building had good bones but terrible reviews. The previous owners had let it fall apart, and the staff had lost their pride. On her first day as owner, Jasmine gathered the entire staff in the faded ballroom. "I'm not here to fire anyone," she began, noticing the relief that washed over many faces. "I'm here because I believe this place can be special again. Not just another hotel, but a place where people truly feel welcome." An older housekeeper in the back raised her hand. "We've heard big promises before." Jasmine nodded. "Fair enough. I don't expect you to believe my words. Watch my actions instead." And action she took. Jasmine worked alongside her staff, rolling up her sleeves to clean rooms, carry luggage, and serve breakfast. She learned everyone's name and story. She invested in training and small improvements that boosted morale before tackling bigger renovations. 6 months later, reviews started to change. A year later, they were booked solid most nights. 2 years later, investors were calling her, not the other way around. By year 5, Elevation Hotels was born, with Jasmine's Chicago success story as its foundation. She expanded carefully, choosing struggling properties she could transform with her unique approach to hospitality. Each new hotel followed the same formula: respect for staff translated to exceptional care for guests. 7 hotels later, with locations in New York, Los Angeles, Miami, Dallas, Boston, and her proudest achievement, a flagship property in her hometown of Atlanta, Jasmine Carter had built more than a hotel chain. She had created a new standard in the industry. Elevation Hotels became known as places where everyone felt valued, from the housekeepers to the highest-paying guests. Little did she know that her greatest challenge and opportunity was waiting just around the corner. Jasmine's Atlanta hotel quickly became the jewel of her growing business. Located in a historic building downtown, she had personally overseen every detail of its renovation. From the warm lighting in the lobby to the local artwork hanging in each room, Every element was designed to make guests feel special. "This place feels like coming home," one regular guest told her, which was exactly what Jasmine had hoped for. Running 7 hotels across the country meant constant travel. Jasmine spent most weeks on the road, flying from one property to another. She believed in seeing things with her own eyes rather than just reading reports. "Numbers tell you how you're doing," she often said to her management teams. "But walking the halls tells you why." This particular Thursday had been especially long. Jasmine had started her day with a 6 a.m. flight from Boston after a late night handling a plumbing emergency at her hotel there. From the airport, she'd gone straight to meetings with potential investors interested in funding her next expansion. By the time her driver dropped her off at her Atlanta hotel, it was nearly midnight. Jasmine's feet hurt, her eyes were heavy, and all she wanted was a hot shower and her favorite room, the corner suite on the top floor that she kept reserved for her visits. She hadn't bothered changing out of her travel clothes, worn jeans and a plain navy sweater. Her usually perfect hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore no makeup after the long day. The small overnight bag she carried had seen better days, but it was a gift from her father when she got her first hotel job, and she couldn't bear to replace it. The lobby was quiet at this hour. Just a few guests sitting in the comfortable chairs, enjoying late-night conversations. None of them gave Jasmine a second glance as she walked toward the front desk. Behind the counter stood a young man Jasmine didn't recognize. His name tag read Thomas, and his uniform was perfectly pressed. He was staring at the computer screen with intense concentration. "Good evening," Jasmine said with a tired smile. Thomas looked up, his customer service smile clicking into place. "Good evening, ma'am. How may I help you?" "I need to check in, please. The corner suite should be ready for me." The clerk's smile faltered slightly. His eyes quickly scanned Jasmine from head to toe, taking in her casual clothes and worn bag. "I'm sorry, but all our suites are occupied tonight," he said, turning back to his computer. "In fact, we're completely booked. There was a big conference in town this week." Jasmine tilted her head slightly. This wasn't right. She knew for a fact that her suite was always blocked out in the system. "Could you please check again? There should be a reservation under Carter." Thomas gave a small sigh that didn't quite hide his impatience. "Ma'am, as I mentioned, we're fully booked. Perhaps you're confused about your reservation date. Or maybe you meant to book at another hotel. There's a more budget-friendly option just down the street that might have availability." The way he emphasized budget-friendly made Jasmine's exhaustion suddenly vanish. She'd been in the industry long enough to recognize what was happening. "I see," she said quietly. "Is Jessica working tonight? Could you please call the manager on duty?" Thomas frowned. "The manager is very busy. I'm sure I can help you find alternative accommodations." Jasmine took a deep breath. In her 20 years in the hospitality business, she had learned when to push and when to step back. This was definitely a time to push. "I'd still like to speak with the manager," she insisted, her voice calm but firm. Thomas picked up the phone with obvious reluctance, turning slightly away as he spoke quietly into the receiver. "Sorry to bother you, but there's a woman at the front desk insisting on speaking with you." "No, she doesn't have a reservation." "Yes, I already suggested the place down the street." Jasmine stood patiently, watching the faces of other guests enjoying her hotel. The comfortable chairs she had personally selected. The signature welcome tea she had created from her grandmother's recipe. The soft music playing in the background at precisely the volume she had specified. A minute later, Jessica appeared from the back office, her professional smile in place until she spotted Jasmine. Then her expression changed to one of shock and dismay. "Ms. Carter." Oh my goodness. The look on Thomas's face was priceless. His eyes widened and his mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. Jessica rushed forward, her hand extended in greeting. "Miss Carter, I am so sorry about this confusion," Jessica said, shooting a sharp glance at Thomas. "Your suite is absolutely ready for you, just as always." Jasmine nodded politely, suddenly very aware of other guests who had looked up at the commotion. She had built her business on discretion and professionalism. Making a scene would go against everything she stood for. "Thank you, Jessica," she said quietly. "I appreciate your help." Thomas stood frozen behind the counter, his face flushed with embarrassment as the reality of his mistake sank in. Jessica quickly took over, her fingers flying across the keyboard. "Thomas," Jessica said, her voice level but with an edge of steel, "please grab the welcome package for Miss Carver's suite while I finish the check-in process." Thomas moved woodenly to a cabinet behind the desk, fumbling with the key. Jasmine could see his hands shaking. "It's been a long day for everyone," Jasmine said, offering him a small smile. Not because he deserved it, but because causing him further distress wouldn't solve anything. Jessica handed Jasmine her room key. "Your suite is ready, as always. Would you like someone to assist with your bag?" "No need," Jasmine replied. "I can manage. But I would like to have breakfast with you tomorrow morning, Jessica. Say 8 a.m. in the private dining room." Jessica nodded quickly. "Of course, Ms. Carter. I'll be there." As Jasmine walked to the elevator, she could hear Jessica's hushed but intense words to Thomas. She pressed the button and waited, her mind already turning over what had happened. This wasn't just about her. If Thomas had treated her this way, how many other guests had faced similar treatment because of assumptions based on their appearance? The elevator doors opened and she stepped inside, grateful for the moment of privacy. As the doors closed, she caught a final glimpse of Thomas's stricken face as Jessica continued speaking to him. In her suite, Jasmine dropped her bag on the floor and kicked off her shoes. The room was perfect as always. Fresh flowers on the table, the air temperature set just how she liked it, and a small plate of her favorite dark chocolate truffles waiting beside the bed. She should have felt relieved to finally be in her room after such a long day. Instead, her mind was racing. She paced the suite, too wound up now for sleep. Picking up her phone, she called the one person who would understand. "Hey, it's late," her sister Nicole answered. "Everything okay?" Jasmine sighed. "Just had an interesting experience downstairs. Got denied a room in my own hotel." "You're kidding." Nicole's voice sharpened with concern. "What happened?" Jasmine recounted the interaction as she peeled off her travel clothes and wrapped herself in the plush hotel robe. "So what are you going to do?" Nicole asked when Jasmine finished. "Fire him on the spot." Jasmine paused, considering. The easy answer would be yes. As CEO, she had every right to fire someone who had treated a guest, any guest, the way Thomas had treated her. The company handbook was clear about their zero-tolerance policy for discrimination. "I'm not sure yet," she admitted. "Something doesn't feel right about just firing him and moving on." "Why not?" Nicole challenged. "He judged you based on how you looked. Classic case of you don't belong here." "I know," Jasmine said, walking to the window to look out at the city lights. "But firing him won't fix the bigger problem, which is that this happens everywhere, all the time. If I fire him, he'll just go work somewhere else and do the same thing." Jasmine tapped her fingers against the window glass. "But if I could find a way to actually change how he thinks?" Nicole laughed. "Always the fixer. Most people would just want revenge." "I'm not most people," Jasmine replied. "And this isn't just about me. It's about every person who walks into one of my hotels and gets judged before they even open their mouth." "So what's your plan?" Jasmine smiled slowly as an idea began to take shape. "I think I'm going to turn this into a teaching moment. For everyone. Now that Nicole said, I'd like to see, just don't go too easy on him." "Trust me," Jasmine said, her resolve strengthening. "By the time I'm done, Thomas won't just understand what he did wrong. He'll be committed to making sure it never happens again to anyone." As she ended the call, Jasmine felt a renewed sense of purpose. Tomorrow wouldn't just be about addressing one incident. It would be about creating lasting change throughout her entire company. Jasmine woke up early the next morning, her mind already clear about what needed to be done. She dressed carefully in a sharp navy suit, her armor for important days. When she walked into the private dining room at exactly 8 a.m., Jessica was already there, looking like she hadn't slept much. "Good morning," Jasmine said, taking a seat across from her night manager. "Ms. Carter," Jessica began immediately, "I want to apologize again for what happened last night. I've already started the paperwork to terminate Thomas's employment." Jasmine raised her hand. "Let's hold off on that for a moment. Tell me about Thomas first." Jessica looked surprised. He's been with us for about 3 weeks, transferred from the downtown location of another chain. His references were excellent and his technical skills are strong. But after last night, what training did he receive when he joined us? Jasmine asked, pouring herself a cup of coffee. The standard orientation package. Company policies, computer systems, emergency procedures. But nothing specific about our core values or how we approach guest interactions. Jessica shifted uncomfortably. We covered the basics in his orientation, but the full training program is scheduled for next month. We've been short-staffed, so we've had to prioritize. Jasmine nodded. This was part of the problem. In their rush to fill positions, they'd put people on the front lines without fully preparing them. I want to call an all-staff meeting for 10 a.m., Jasmine said. Everyone who's in the building today, can you arrange that? Of course, Jessica replied, clearly relieved that Jasmine wasn't more upset. Should I? Should I tell Thomas to attend? Especially Thomas, Jasmine said. But don't tell him or anyone else what it's about. By 10 a.m., the hotel's main conference room was packed. Housekeepers still in their uniforms sat next to kitchen staff, front desk employees, and management. There was a nervous energy in the room. Surprise staff meetings called by the CEO rarely meant good news. Jasmine stood at the front of the room, scanning the faces of her team. Thomas was sitting in the back row, looking like he might be sick. When their eyes met, he quickly looked down at his hands. Good morning, everyone, Jasmine began. For those who don't know me, I'm Jasmine Carter, the founder and CEO of Elevation Hotels. A few of the newer staff members looked surprised. Jasmine made a mental note of this. Her face should be familiar to everyone who worked for her. I want to share something that happened to me last night, she continued. I arrived at this hotel, our flagship location, after a very long day of travel. I was tired, dressed in jeans and a sweater, and carrying an old bag. When I approached the front desk to check in, I was told the hotel was fully booked, including my personal suite that is always reserved for me. I was then directed to a budget hotel down the street. Murmurs rippled through the room. A few heads turned toward Thomas, whose face had turned bright red. I'm not sharing this to embarrass anyone, Jasmine said clearly. I'm sharing it because it made me realize we have a problem that needs fixing. She moved away from the podium, walking slowly through the center of the room. How many of you have ever been judged based on how you look? She asked. Maybe in a store or a restaurant or even at another hotel. Raise your hand if you've experienced this. Slowly, hands began to rise. First just a few, then more. Nearly 3/4 of the room had their hands up, including most of the housekeeping staff and many of the kitchen workers. Now keep your hand up if that experience made you feel small or angry or like you didn't belong. No hands went down. This is why we started Elevation Hotels, Jasmine said softly. Because everyone deserves to be treated with dignity and respect, regardless of what they're wearing, how tired they look, or the color of their skin. She made her way back to the front of the room. I could fire the person who treated me this way, she said. That would be easy, but it wouldn't solve the real problem. The problem isn't one employee. It's a culture that allows snap judgments to determine how we treat people. Thomas looked up, his expression a mix of shame and confusion. Starting today, Jasmine announced, we're launching a new training initiative. Every employee, from me to our newest hires, will participate. We're going to talk openly about bias, about assumptions, and about how to truly see each person who walks through our doors. She smiled at the room. This isn't about punishment, it's about growing together. And I want the person who didn't recognize me last night to help lead this initiative. The room went silent. All eyes turned to Thomas, who looked completely stunned. Me? He finally managed to say. Thomas looked like he might faint. But I'm the one who messed up. I'm the problem. Jasmine walked over to where he sat. No, Thomas. You're not the problem. You're just someone who made a mistake that many people make every day. The difference is you now have a chance to help fix it. She turned to address the whole room again. I need everyone to understand something important. We all have biases, every single one of us. They come from how we grew up, what we see on TV, and the stories we hear. The real problem happens when we don't recognize these biases and let them control how we treat people. A housekeeper in the front row raised her hand hesitantly. "Miss Carter, can I say something?" "Of course," Jasmine said, smiling at her. "Last week, a guest assumed I couldn't speak English and talked real slow and loud at me," the woman said. "I've been in this country for 30 years and have a college degree. It made me feel invisible." Several other staff members nodded in understanding. "Thank you for sharing that," Jasmine said. "That's exactly the kind of experience we need to talk about. These moments happen all the time, but we rarely discuss them openly." After the meeting, Jasmine asked Thomas to join her in her office. He followed her with his shoulders hunched, clearly expecting the worst. Once inside with the door closed, he couldn't hold back anymore. "Miss Carter, I am so sorry," he blurted out. "I swear I'm not a bad person. I don't know why I assumed. I mean, I don't think of myself as someone who judges people, but clearly I did, and I'm just so sorry." Jasmine gestured for him to sit down. "Thomas, I believe you. But here's the thing about bias. It's usually not conscious. You didn't wake up yesterday thinking, I'm going to discriminate against someone today." Thomas shook his head vigorously. "Never. My mom raised me better than that." "I'm sure she did," Jasmine said. "But we all absorb messages from the world around us. The question is, what do we do when we realize those messages are wrong?" Thomas looked at her directly for the first time. "We fix it." "Exactly," Jasmine said with a nod. "So here's what I'm proposing. Instead of firing you, I want you to work with me and a team I'm putting together to create a new training program. One that addresses these hidden biases head-on." "But why me?" Thomas asked, confusion clear on his face. "Why not someone with more experience or someone who didn't mess up?" Jasmine leaned forward. "Because you now understand this problem in a way few people do. You've seen it from both sides, making the mistake and feeling the consequences. That perspective is valuable." For the first time, Thomas seemed to relax slightly. "What would I have to do?" "Talk honestly about what happened. Help design exercises that might help others recognize their own biases. And most importantly, be willing to learn and change." Thomas was quiet for a moment. "My grandma always said that mistakes are only worth making if you learn from them." He took a deep breath. "I want to do this. I want to make this right." Over the next few weeks, Jasmine brought in experts in diversity and inclusion to work with a small team, including Thomas. They met in the conference room for hours at a time, sharing personal experiences and researching best practices. Thomas surprised everyone with his dedication. He stayed late reading articles about unconscious bias and brought in ideas from psychology courses he'd taken in college. "The key," he said during one meeting, "is making people feel what it's like to be on the receiving end of these judgments. We can't just tell them it's wrong. They need to feel it." Jasmine watched as the shy, embarrassed young man transformed into a passionate advocate. In one particularly powerful session, Thomas stood up and shared his own story. "Before working here, I never thought about how I treat people based on first impressions," he admitted to the group. "But now I catch myself doing it all the time, making snap judgments about guests based on their clothes, or their accent, or how they look. And each time, I stop and think, what if this is another Ms. Carter?" By the end of the month, they had created something special, a training program unlike anything the hotel industry had seen before. They called it the Elevation Experience, and it went far beyond the usual corporate diversity training. And Jasmine knew this was just the beginning. 6 months after that night at the front desk, Jasmine stood in the back of her Atlanta hotel's largest conference room. She watched with pride as Thomas guided a group of hotel managers through an exercise about first impressions. "Okay, everyone look at this photo," Thomas said, pointing to a screen showing a woman in worn clothes sitting in a hotel lobby. "Write down your first thoughts. Be honest. No one will see what you write." The room fell quiet as people scribbled notes. Jasmine noticed how much Thomas had changed since that night. He stood taller now, spoke with confidence. More importantly, he believed in what he was teaching. "Now," Thomas continued after a minute, "I want to tell you about this woman. She's a neurosurgeon who just finished a 16-hour surgery saving a child's life. She changed into comfortable clothes before coming to check in because her dress clothes were stained with blood. She's staying here while attending a medical conference where she's the keynote speaker. Murmurs spread across the room as people looked down at what they'd written. How many of you wrote something about her not belonging in a luxury hotel? Thomas asked gently, or wondered if she could afford the room. Nearly half the hands in the room went up, some hesitantly. That's okay, Thomas said. That's why we're here. To notice these thoughts and learn to look beyond our first impressions. Jasmine smiled. The training program had grown beyond her wildest expectations. What started as a response to one incident had become a movement within her company. Every employee, from dishwashers to executives, went through the program. The results showed in their guest satisfaction scores, which had climbed steadily for months. After the session ended, Jasmine approached Thomas as he gathered his materials. That was excellent, she said. You've really mastered this. Thomas grinned. Thanks. You know, my mom came to visit last weekend, and I caught myself explaining unconscious bias to her over dinner. She said I sounded like a professor. Jasmine laughed. A very effective professor. Have you thought more about my offer? The offer had come last week, a promotion to create and lead a new position, Director of Guest Experience Training for all 7 Elevation hotels. Thomas nodded. I have, and I want to accept. But honestly, it still feels strange sometimes. I mean, if I had recognized you that night, none of this would have happened. Maybe, Jasmine said, but think of it this way. What if you had recognized me, treated me wonderfully, but continued to judge other guests based on their appearance? Would that have been better? Thomas shook his head. No. It would have been worse because no one would have noticed the problem. A knock at the door interrupted them. Jessica poked her head in. Sorry to bother you, but there's someone here I think you should meet, she said. She opened the door wider to reveal an older man in a business suit. This is Mr. Chen. He owns the Parkview Hotel Group. Jasmine stepped forward with her hand extended. Mr. Chen, it's a pleasure to meet you. Ms. Carter, the man said, shaking her hand firmly. I've heard remarkable things about your training program. One of my regular guests stayed here last month and said the difference in how your staff treated everyone was noticeable. I had to see for myself. Jasmine introduced Thomas, who explained the core principles of the program. Mr. Chen listened intently, asking thoughtful questions. We've had the usual diversity training in our hotels, Mr. Chen said finally, but it never seems to stick. This approach, focusing on real experiences and emotional connections, this feels different. It is different, Thomas said with conviction, because it's not about rules or policies, it's about changing how we see people. Mr. Chen turned to Jasmine. I'd like to discuss the possibility of implementing your program across my 12 hotels. Would you be open to that? Jasmine felt a surge of excitement. This was bigger than she had imagined. We certainly could discuss that. Thomas will actually be heading up our training division starting next month. As they walked Mr. Chen to Jasmine's office to talk details, Thomas leaned over and whispered, Is this really happening? Are we actually going to change how hotels work? Jasmine smiled. One front desk at a time, Thomas. One front desk at a time. What had started as an uncomfortable night was turning into something that could transform an entire industry. And Jasmine couldn't help thinking that sometimes the most painful moments led to the most important changes. 2 years after that fateful night, Jasmine stood on a stage in front of hundreds of hotel industry professionals. The spotlight felt warm on her face as she looked out at the crowd. I never planned to create a training program, she said into the microphone. I just wanted to fix a problem I saw in my own hotel. The National Hospitality Association's annual conference was the biggest event in the industry. Being asked to give the keynote speech was an honor Jasmine hadn't expected. But sometimes, she continued, the smallest moments can lead to the biggest changes. In the front row, Thomas sat with the rest of the Elevation Hotels team. He looked different now, confident in his tailored suit, a director's badge pinned to his lapel. Beside him sat Jessica, now the general manager of the Atlanta property. The Elevation Experience isn't just a training program, Jasmine explained. It's a promise to see each person who walks through our doors as an individual worthy of respect. She clicked to the next slide, showing a graph of guest satisfaction scores across all hotels that had implemented the program. The results speak for themselves. When guests feel truly welcomed, they come back. They tell their friends. They trust you with their business. The numbers were impressive. Hotels using the program saw a 40% increase in repeat bookings and a 35% jump in positive reviews. But it wasn't just about business metrics. What matters most, Jasmine said, are the stories behind these numbers. She shared testimonials from guests, a woman in a wheelchair who said it was the first time she'd been offered a room without having to specifically request accommodations, an elderly man who mentioned how staff took time to explain the digital key system without making him feel out of touch, a family wearing traditional clothing who wrote about how comfortable they felt in the lobby. But my favorite story, Jasmine said, is about the young man who didn't recognize me that night. She gestured to Thomas, who gave a small wave as hundreds of eyes turned toward him. Instead of firing him, I asked him to help create a solution. Today, he leads our training division and has personally brought this program to over 50 hotels outside our chain. The audience applauded, and Thomas's face flushed with a mix of embarrassment and pride. The easy path would have been anger, Jasmine continued once the clapping died down. I could have made an example of him, could have used my power to punish rather than to teach. But what would that have solved? She paused, letting the question hang in the air. True leadership isn't about proving you're right or making others feel small. It's about seeing potential where others see problems. It's about building bridges instead of walls. After her speech, Jasmine was surrounded by hotel owners and managers eager to bring the program to their properties. Business cards were pressed into her hands as people shared their own stories of lessons learned the hard way. Later, at a small celebration dinner with her team, Jasmine raised a glass of champagne. To mistakes that turn into opportunities, she said. Everyone clinked glasses. Thomas looked at her across the table. I've been wanting to tell you something, he said. I got a letter last week from a guest at the Dallas property. He said he was treated with such respect by our staff that it was the first time he'd felt truly welcome at a luxury hotel. That's wonderful, Jasmine said. He also mentioned that it was his first time staying at a high-end hotel because he usually feels out of place. Thomas smiled. He said he'd been saving up for years to treat himself for his 60th birthday, and he was afraid he'd be judged for not looking like he belonged there. Jessica leaned forward. Did he say what made him feel so welcome? Thomas nodded. The front desk clerk who checked him in. Apparently, she told him, everyone who walks through these doors belongs here. That's the elevation promise. Jasmine felt a lump in her throat. This was exactly what she'd hoped for when she started her company years ago. Not just successful hotels, but places where people truly felt they belonged. As the evening wound down, Jasmine found herself standing by the window, looking out at the city lights. Her sister Nicole joined her. Remember when you called me that night? Nicole asked. You said you wanted to turn it into a teaching moment. Jasmine nodded. I had no idea how far it would go. That's what happens when you choose understanding over anger, Nicole said. You changed more than just one person's mind. You changed an entire industry. Jasmine smiled as she watched her team laughing together, people from different backgrounds, different experiences, all working toward the same goal. One front desk at a time, she said softly. One front desk at a time.